Afraid to plug or touch.
I know, but I want to film it with that.
For what?
So maybe. I have it. It's like right here.
I can't imagine.
You have to make sure you have to clip it to now. This part to here. And then here it is. I'm gonna hit on.
Testing?
Yep.
Okay.
Do you want to? So if you want to keep it off for now.
Okay.
And then with the candle, if you want to, you can just like kind of lift it and do it while your back's turned to the audience, because it's the battery one.
Okay.
Do you want to look at it?
Yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure about the back, but.
Can we see Grandma's?
He called me like an hour ago. He'll be here. Don't see him. Oh, he's in the bathroom. He's all the way in the bathroom.
Right, we are
Right
3
on.
minutes after. When do you want to start? 7:01.
Start 7:03?
7:05 is fine.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this is my favorite picture. This is the older brother feeding the
But they're older now.
Ladies and gents, we're going to start our program in like a minute, so if you can, take your seats, please.
On the 9th and 10th of November 1938, a wave of mass violence against the Jews took place throughout the Third Reich in accordance with Nazi Party instructions and with the participation of its forces. Hundreds of synagogues were partially or totally destroyed. 7,500 stores and many private homes were attacked. 91 Jews were murdered, and at least 26,000 Jewish men were sent to concentration camps. The streets were covered with broken glass, hence the well-known Nazi name for the pogrom, Kristallnacht. These events marked a shift from the previous institutional and legal persecution against the Jews, which then took on the form of a widespread and violent outburst. The official reason for the outbreak of the pogrom was the assassination of the German diplomat Ernst von Raff in Paris. But in fact, it was the result of months of planning and close cooperation between the levels of government, the party, and the economic authorities. From the fall of 1937, economic sanctions against the Jews intensified, gradually worsening over the course of 1938. The goal was to make economic life impossible for the Jews, and thus to expedite their departure from the country. The use of violence was intended to complete this goal. The pogrom brought sharp denunciations in the press and from public opinion in the Western countries. In Germany, however, the accusations were aimed at the victims, and the Jewish community was forced to pay a ransom of upwards of 1 billion Reichsmarks. The German authorities also issued edicts aimed at further forcing Jews out of society and the economy. Jews were made to close their stores and transfer their property at a loss to Aryan ownership. They were forced out of all public arenas, from schools to theaters, and their freedom of movement and housing rights were significantly limited. Some 2 months later, the Reich Central Office for Jewish Emigration was set up in Berlin. What had until then been a planned emigration of German Jewry turned into an emergency flight. The danger had become more tangible than ever, and they were willing to immigrate anywhere that would have them.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Bob Lowy, and I'm proud to be the chair of the Baltimore Jewish Council's Holocaust Remembrance Commission. In partnership with Bethel Congregation, I'm honored to welcome you to this evening's commemoration of the Night of Broken Glass. I'd like to express our gratitude to the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and Bethel Congregation for their support of tonight's program. Before I welcome our guest speaker, I'm pleased to invite Rabbi Dana Sorokin of Bethel Congregation to share some brief remarks on the importance of the memory of the Shoah. Thank you, Rabbi.
It was a summer night, and we were in Jerusalem with Avram Infeld, who would go on to become quite an extraordinary leader in the Jewish community. He gathered together with a group of us teenagers at the time, and he shared his story of when he first came to Israel and he first made Aliyah. And he shared with us, sitting on the southern excavation in the old city of Jerusalem, where the temple used to stand, that when he first arrived in Jerusalem, he said he grew up in a family of Zionists. He learned to love Israel from a very young age, and that he eventually found his way to Israel, and he wrote his father a letter when he arrived. And he said, "Dear Abba," he said, "I just wanted to let you know we finally made it to Israel. I'm living in Jerusalem, and you'll be so happy to know that I've enrolled in the Hebrew University, where I am studying Jewish history." His father wrote him a letter back, which he received a little while later, and it said, "Dear Avram, I'm so glad that you made it to Jerusalem. I'm so glad that you're happy. I'm happy that you're studying at Hebrew University." He said, "But Avram, Jewish history?" Avram, the Jewish people don't have history. We have memory. So what's the difference between Jewish history and Jewish memory? I think Jewish history is someone's story. Jewish memory is owning that story as our own. And so tonight, we come together to remember our story, the story of our people, a story that we would prefer never to have known, to never have happened. But the truth is that this year, it doesn't take much creative imagination for us to recognize how something like this could happen. And so, tonight I want to say thank you for hosting this program, Baltimore Jewish Council, for hosting it here at Bethel Congregation, and even more importantly, I want to thank you all for coming together to tell our story and to remember what can happen in our world then and also in our world today. May we all have the determination, the perseverance, the chutzpah, and the motivation to fight hate wherever we see it. And may we all go forward to help create a better world for the Jewish people, for the people of Israel, and for our entire world together. And to that we can say amen. I've been asked to recite a prayer for our country. Our God and God of our ancestors, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, bless this country and bless all who dwell within it. Help us to experience the blessings of our lives and circumstances. Help us to be vigilant, compassionate, and brave. Strengthen us when we are afraid. Help us to channel our anger so that it motivates us to action. Help us to feel our fear so that we never become numb. Help us to become generous with others so that we can raise each other up. Help us to be humble in our fear, knowing that as vulnerable as we feel sometimes, there are those at greater risk, perhaps, and that it is our holy work to stand with them and to stand together as a Jewish people as one. We ask you, God, to help us to taste the sweetness of liberty and to never take for granted the freedoms won in generations past or in recent days. Help us, God, to heal and nourish our democracy so that it may be like a tree planted by the water whose roots reach down to the stream. It need not fear drought when it comes, for its leaves are always green. Help us, God, to create a better world for all. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your remarks and for welcoming us into your synagogue this evening. Tonight, we are here to remember the horrors of the night of Kristallnacht, or the night of broken glass. 86 years ago, Jews in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland experienced the first widespread eruption of organized, state-sponsored, and let me repeat that, state-sponsored legal violence against Jewish individuals, businesses, as well as synagogues. It is estimated that 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses and 267 synagogues were physically shattered and burned to the ground as the SA and Hitler Youth broke through their windows and looted their wares. Jewish schools and hospitals were desecrated, and approximately 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and taken to concentration camps. 236 individuals were killed. While we reflect upon the pogroms of 1938, we reflect on the violence experienced by the people of Israel a year ago on October 7th. We all remember that day. When we remember the Holocaust, we use the phrase, "never again," to ensure that the heinous acts of violence and hatred experienced by European Jewry in the 30s and 40s never repeats. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that never again is now. We thank you all for being with us tonight to remember the lives forever changed by the lost to the Holocaust, and to remember all of the victims of hatred and violence that unfortunately still plagues our world today. You've heard it all year. You've seen it downtown. The desecration of the signage at Baltimore Hebrew, as well as the Stevenson overpass. Anti-Semitism is up 400%. We hear it and see it daily in our news. Our hope is that you will leave this program with something new to share to the community, to educate and inspire and be somewhat of a light in a time of this darkness. Tonight we will learn about the inspiring program that is called Stolperstein, otherwise known as Stumbling Stones. Stolperstein is a miraculous effort that began in 1992 to mark the last addresses of choice of the victims of the Holocaust. This global effort has placed over 100,000 stones in 26 countries. In my eyes, it promotes our age-old Jewish philosophy of L'Dor Vador, from generation to generation. This is a wonderful effort to ensure that the memory of victims of the Holocaust are not erased from the homes where they were raised, for the world to forever remember the role that Jewish and other victims of Nazi persecution played in the world before they were senselessly and cruelly uprooted by Hitler's evil regime. Our speaker this evening is Judy Gartner. Judy and her husband Randy live in Ellicott City, Maryland, where they both have been on the Howard County Holocaust Remembrance Committee for many years. Judy's parents were Mina and Carl Weiler. Both left Nazi Germany in the late 1930s. They left behind many family members who did not survive the Holocaust. Judy was always keenly aware of the extended family that she did not have due to the Holocaust. Judy very much missed not having a link to her family's past and felt jealous of her friends who had grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Fortunately, Judy's father wrote down the family history, tracing the history of her paternal family. Judy also had the privilege of traveling back to Germany with her parents, starting at the age of 14, and was able to learn more about her mother's side of the family. Unlike many refugees from Europe, Judy's parents chose to go back to visit Germany and returned several times. In college, Judy spent her junior year of college in Freiburg, Germany, where she learned to speak German and was invited to some of the homes of her mother's friends and neighbors. Holocaust remembrance has been very important to Judy and Randy. Judy started attending the programs with her mother when they were in Baltimore and remembers going to the services they were held at the Holocaust Memorial in downtown Baltimore. Judy will have the privileges of telling her father's story in a few more days when she goes to Lake Stolperstein in Brackel, Germany, the small German town in Westphalia where her father Carl grew up. It's my honor to welcome Judy Gartner to share more about this incredible program and her experience honoring her family. On her way to the podium, Judy will light a candle to honor the victims of the Shoah.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to, for a minute, look at a short video that I think does a great job in explaining about the Stolpersteiner project. So just real briefly, Stolpersteiner translates to stumbling stone. And as I am talking, I will probably be using these terms interchangeably. This project continues to expand. As I was getting ready to do this talk, I emailed the people from the Stolpersteiner project, and they told me that there are now 113,000 stumbling stones in 31 countries, making it the largest decentralized memorial to the Holocaust. These stones are for remembering individuals in their communities where they once lived. Gunter Deming, the artist who started this project, frequently quotes the Talmud when he says, "A man is only forgotten when his name is forgotten." According to the Stolpersteiner webpage, the Nazis wanted to destroy people, turn them into numbers, and even erase the memory of them. Gunter Deming wants to reverse this process and bring the names back to the cities and to where people once lived. So it's not just a stone, but a stone with a link to the past, with a story to convey to the passerby, thus allowing people to see what happened not so long ago in their communities. So each stone has a story. So now let me tell you my family's story and my experience with laying Stolpersteine, or stumbling stones, in Germany. My parents were Minna and Karl Weiler. They both came from very small towns in Germany. My mother grew up in Gemmingen, which is near Stuttgart. My father grew up in Brockel in Westphalia, about 2 hours south of Hanover. These are pictures, passport pictures of my parents when they left Germany. My father left Germany in December 1937 at the age of 33. My mother left in June 1938 at the age of 24. They did not know each other. They met in Baltimore in 1942 through a mutual friend and married a short time later. I often wondered how my parents had the foresight to leave Germany, but my grandparents did not. I believe that my parents chose to leave Germany because Nazis' laws and decrees had upended their lives and their plans for the future. My father should have been a judge in Germany. He had completed his law degree and had an initial appointment as an assistant judge, which lasted only a few months, maybe it was even a few weeks, until Hitler declared that Jews could not hold any government offices. Similarly, my mother was studying dentistry and was unable to complete her studies in Germany, as Jews were no longer allowed to study in the universities in Germany. In order to finish her dental degree, she enrolled at the University of Basel, Switzerland, which is where she finished her degree. After completing her studies, she was not allowed to remain in Switzerland and had to return to Germany. A year and a half ago, I laid stumbling stones for my paternal grandparents in Berlin. This was their last residence before being deported. Berlin has laid many stumbling stones for its community, and the Stumbling Stone organization in Berlin is now organized by city districts to accommodate the many requests for Stolpersteine. I had looked into stumbling stones for relatives in Gemmingen and Munich, but was informed that these communities were not doing stumbling stones. So now let me talk about my father's family. My father's father was Friedrich Weiler, known to everyone as Fritz. His mother was Ella Weiler. The Weilers had lived for several generations in the small town of Brockel and were very prosperous. My father was very proud of this photo. It was taken in 1912, and I don't know if you can see in the bottom, there's a car there. He was one of the first people in that little town, my father's grandfather, to have an automobile. And my father had very fond memories of riding into the countryside with his grandfather. So pay attention to this picture because it will come back later. The Weilers had lived, the family had a successful agricultural products business providing grain and seed to local farmers. The firm, when my father's father took on business partners, was then called Weiler, Heineberg, and Flechtine. His firm was so successful that the three business partners were called the Heilige Drei Könige, or the Three Wise Men, which was a nod to a Christian holiday widely celebrated in Westphalia. Kind of ironic. My father's parents felt like they were Germans first. These are photos of my father's father in his uniform during World War I. Fritz received the Iron Cross for fighting in World War I, as well as a certificate that says, if you can see at the top, in der Name der Führer, dated 1934. Pretty interesting. Starting in 1933, Nazi ideology penetrated into the idyllic town of Brockel. There were streamers saying, "Don't buy from the Jews," and "Jews get out." Then sometime later, there were the boycotts of the Jewish businesses. Fritz, with his business partners, started to contemplate whether or not they should sell the business. In 1936, the sale of the business began. My father, in 1933, after no longer being able to work in the judicial system, had entered the family business, and it was my father who conducted the liquidation of the firm Weiler, Heineberg, and Flechtine. In 1936, with the liquidation of the business underway, my grandparents, Fritz and Ella Weiler, decided to move away from Brockel to Berlin, feeling that life for a Jew would be easier and safer in a big city. According to my father, only after Kristallnacht in November of 1938 did his parents begin to realize that they needed to get out of Germany, but by then it was too difficult to get a visa to the United States. This is the application to make an application for a visa. And the number down there, they were 54,963rd and 64th person on the wait list to come to the United States. So obviously, they didn't get out. They didn't get to the US. My father and his parents tried to get visas to other countries, including Cuba, but all their efforts failed. They were deported to Terezin on July 8, 1942. At the time of my parents' death, they never knew exactly what happened to their parents. This was the letter that my father got. He had written to the American Joint Distribution Committee trying to find out their fates. And he was basically told they went to Terezin and from there somewhere into Poland. But he never knew exactly what happened. Sometime later, I was able to find out that they went from Terezin to Treblinka. When I found out about the Stolpersteiner project in Berlin through a friend, I felt like I could provide some closure for my father and do something to memorialize his parents. My friend Sarah had a coworker who had gone to Berlin to lay Stolpersteine, and Sarah was able to get me the email address for the project in Berlin. I sent an email and received information about the project along with an application to complete. So this is kind of general information. And then I'm gonna flip to the next. And then here was the information that I needed to fill out. So, and as you see, they asked for the last address. So fortunately, I had the last address because I had correspondence that my father had between his family during the war, or his attempts. So, it's probably gonna lose, so. Down here in the corner is the address where they lived. So, just briefly here, so this is a response that my father got from a stranger. And basically it says, "Dear Mr. Weiler, your parents went to an old age home. I wish them a good trip. Sincerely, Carl Hefner." My father did not know Carl Hefner. So I don't know if this was like a code word. Recently I looked up about Red Cross letters, and it said that, due to censorship, sometimes they were code words. So I don't know if this was a code word, old age home, or, whether he didn't know, but old age home was the old age transport to Terezin. So, I completed the application that I showed you, and sometime later I received an email from a woman named Angelica, who was a volunteer researcher who worked on a biography of my grandparents and also acted as a liaison between my family and the organization. She helped to set the date. Typically in Berlin, there's a 2-year wait, but due to wanting to participate in the dedication, as well as the COVID pandemic happening, and then some personal health issues, it was over 4 years between my initial contact with the organization and my laying of the stumbling stones. My husband and I, as well as my sister, were there to witness the ceremony, which was very moving. It took place outside their last voluntary home, which is the house that you see in that poster. They lived in an apartment in that building. In attendance at the ceremony were people from the neighborhood, as well as several residents of the current home. The ceremony started out with a man playing the accordion. Angelica welcomed my family to the dedication. While Angelica was talking, a man replaced 2 cobblestones on the sidewalk with 2 cobblestones with brass plates. 1 stone was for my paternal grandmother, the other for my paternal grandfather. It had their names, dates of birth, and their fates. And those are copies, or those are pictures of the stones. As part of the dedication, at my request, Angelica read the poem that I'd given her that my father wrote when he left Germany, which I will read to you later. She then read the biographies that she wrote of Fritz and Ella Weiler. It concluded with a woman singing some songs and the neighbors laying white roses on the stones. Laying one of the flowers was a 10-year-old boy who is the son of the current owner of the house. Also in attendance was the family of my mother's next-door neighbor from the town of Gemmingen. They had come to support us. After the ceremony was over, the woman who currently owns the house and the mother of that 10-year-old boy came over to me and said, "Don't worry, I will take care of the stones." This touched me in a very profound way. There were many reasons why I wanted to lay the stones for my father's parents. Judaism has so many rituals around mourning, but how do you remember someone when there's no date of death or burial spot? For people who lost family members in the Holocaust, this was a dilemma. Growing up, I remember my parents going to synagogue on what would have been their parents' birthday. It was a day to remember and mourn the life of their loved one. It was the closest they could come to having a yahrzeit date, as there was no information about their deaths. Stumbling Stones for me was a memorial plaque, and it gave a specific place and location to remember my paternal grandparents. Stumbling stones are for an individual. It is in the community, in their neighborhood. It not only memorializes my grandparents, but it is a reminder to the residents of that neighborhood what happened to individuals who once lived among them. Gunter Deming quotes the Talmud and says, "A man is only forgotten when his name is forgotten." With these stones, I believe that their names will not be forgotten. Passers-by will stumble onto the stone and read the name and know there was a person who lived here and had their life altered by the Holocaust. There is now a lasting memorial to my grandparents that will survive my lifetime. Passers-by or members of the community, if they want to know more about my grandparents, can go to the Stolpersteiner Berlin website and see photos of my grandparents and can read their biography. They can also check out the references and get other links to information about my family. I actually checked out one of these links that led me to get information about where my father went to high school and what happened to the Jewish students who attended his high school. After communicating with the person on this website, I found out that the little town of Brockel was going to be laying some Stolpersteine for the Jewish residents of the town. Some months later, I was doing a Google search of Brockel and found out that the town had laid some stones in February 2024. So, As you see, that the top photo was that photo from 1912 of the house. A relative had gone back to Brockle and had brought another picture back, which I think was from 1968. So I knew a little bit, some of the changes that had been made to the house. So here was an article in the newspaper that said that the Weiler family and another family were memorialized. And somewhere, which I could not find again for this talk, there are pictures of stones of my father's aunt and his cousin who had lived in this home. My father had actually never lived in this home. It was his grandfather who lived there, and then I guess the uncle had inherited it. So I then did some more Google searching. You can go down that Google rabbit hole. And I was able to contact the person in charge of the archives for Brockle, and I shared that photo from 1912. He then informed me that there would be stones laid for my father, his sister, and his parents outside the home they lived in, Genzina Street. I was then able to communicate with the person organizing the laying of the stones in Brockle, and they worked with me on a date that worked for us to go to Brockle for laying of the Stolpersteine for my father and his family. I am leaving in 2 days for Germany, and this ceremony will take place next Wednesday. So these are photos of the stones that are going to be laid next week, or in the next 2 weeks in Brockle. And there's the one for my father. So I just kind of wanted to explain this a little bit. This is the writing on the stones. So the stones can be for people who survived as well as people who died in the Holocaust. So each of the stone is a little bit different. So for my father's parents, it said, "Here lived," and Friedrich Weiler, Ella Weiler, and for Ella Weiler, maiden name Adaheimer, year of birth 1879, and unfreiwillig verzogen. So unwillingly had to move to Berlin, 1936, deported 1942, Theresen, Treblinka, murdered. My father's sister, she fled to Hungary, deported 1944 for forced labor in Lichtenworth, murdered. In the last few weeks, I have thought a lot about how my father would feel about us going back to Brockle. Although my father went many times back to Germany, he did not go back to Brockle. He stated that he did not want people to make nice when they had not been nice. So, is it okay for me to go? I hope that he would be happy to know that I shared his memoir that he wrote, and the Historical Society is working on translating it into German. I would also hope that he would be happy that I will be talking to high school students and telling his story and that of his family. I hope that he will feel that by laying these stones, that the members of the community are owning to some degree what happened to their citizens. Germany was my father's beloved country, and what happened was unthinkable. He expressed these sentiments in this poem that he wrote on board ship when leaving Germany and emigrating to the United States. My father left Germany by himself. He was alone on the ship with lots of time to think. This is what he wrote. December 1937, parting thoughts, an emigrant. The evil hand moved, a slight pressure, and the thin layer of good manners are shattered. The law's bond is broken, and from the depths long held back, the dark powers roll. Man turns back into an animal, wild anger and hate and greed. Slander, envy, and baseness unite with lust for power. The people have exchanged their God since they listened to the voice of the deceiver. Crowds are incited with harsh speeches. Dark rubbish is unleashed. The cross is replaced by the swastika, and racial hatred supplants charity. Madness grows without resistance. The torpid deluge inundates the land. That is Germany. What is happening to you? You, land of spirit, of culture. You, land of art and science. Why are you being punished so severely? How is it possible? I cannot believe it. But I have to leave you, my fatherland. You were beautiful. Farewell, maybe auf Wiedersehen. And for those of you who know German, auf Wiedersehen is goodbye and see you. Hope to see you again. Okay.
Thank you, Judy. So I'm sure I speak for everyone that, we learned a lot. I mean, I, for one, knew about the program, but I had no clue that it was all over the world in now 31 countries. So it's enlightening, and I hope everyone had a meaningful experience this evening and learned a little bit. We have some more time for some questions if anybody is interested. There is a resource sheet here that's up front that'll give you some information if you're at all a second or third generation or know someone second or third generation. So if there's any questions for Judy?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just thank you so much, Judy, for
Thank you.
sharing everything that you did with us. I have a specific question and then a general question. When you learned about the Stolperstein project, you reached out and then you were contacted. In my parents' village, we're beginning this process now. Who, and of course, we want to pay for it, whatever, but I understand there's no charge. Who is paying for all of this? And does each community take it upon themselves or not take it upon themselves to engage in it? Can you share some of that with us?
Usually if you're the person who initiates it, usually that person will pay for it. But sometimes, like in Brockle, what they told me was the community did fundraising to pay for the stones. So sometimes they have sponsors. I think they try not to have the immediate family pay for it if they can get a sponsor. So it kind of varies. So
because we recently were contacted by somebody who lives in the village about possibly doing this. Another question.
and I believe the cost is 120 euros per stone.
Another more general question. The word Kristallnacht. We grew up knowing, this is what you call Kristallnacht. Recently, we went to Germany with grandchildren, been there a number of times before, and we are in contact with a gentleman who is the director for civic discourse and teaches anti-Semitism, tolerance, etc., in the whole region, the Rhineland. And a few months ago, as we were there, he said, we no longer use the word Kristallnacht. What? What do you mean? They use the word Pogromnacht. Why? Yes, the night of pogrom. Why? He said the Nazis are the ones who came up with the word Kristallnacht because it was more beautiful sounding, broken glass, which obviously it was much more than that. So in Germany, according to this gentleman, scholars are using the word Pogromnacht. Now, I don't know if that's happening in the US, but that's what we were told recently.
That's interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
Wait. What's it with?
Hi.
How are you?
Still around.
Still around, of course. Yeah. Pleasure.
How do I do
Here,
this?
tell you what, you speak, I'll keep it.
Yes. I was in Germany during the night of broken glass. My father was taken to the concentration camp. And in the meantime, I've made friends with a non-Jewish man in Germany who has researched my whole history. And I have a copy of the Stolpersteiner they put in front of our house. And he told me that he went around collecting money. And I said, well, if there's not enough money, I want these Stolpersteiner in front of our house if the current owner approves. That's the thing, which they did. And my father, in the better days in Germany, belonged to a choir, and that choir still exists.
Wow.
And when he went, he said, I'm collecting money for Mr. Wertham. We're going to put up Stolpersteiner, and there's not enough money. Oh, right away, without question, they were very happy to contribute to it. And I talked to this gentleman at least once a week. And he has researched my family, and he knows more about my family than I do. And it's a very good relationship. But they're trying to make amends, and that's what I think.
What year did they put down the stumbling stone?
Here's a copy of the book.
Anybody wants to look through it, I have a book with the Stolpersteiner.
Come back. Sir Rosenberg, thank you for coming. Thank you.
I'm Sandy Rosenberg, and I'm here to talk about my uncle, Hal Sonnenfeld. Oh, my assistant, yes.
Yeah.
In the lower right-hand corner is the stone for the Sonnenfeld family, because about 10 years ago, they grew up in Gardelegen, which is in what was East Germany, and was about an hour train ride in modern times, post-Holocaust, from Berlin. And so I went to Berlin on my way to Israel, as you can see by some of the other photos, and made plans to go to Gardelegen. And the house where the Sonnenfelds lived is, both the house is open as well as having the stones outside. And I spoke to my aunt this morning, my mother's younger sister, to confirm my facts. And when Uncle Hal, known as Helmut, Helmut, when he was 12, about 2 years before Kristallnacht, they made plans to leave, his mother and his older brother and Hal, and they didn't know if they would ever see their father again. Both parents were doctors, MDs, and they both eventually came to Baltimore and practiced in South Baltimore. And family lore has it that among the families they treated was the Kaline family. And you might know that young Al Kaline went to Southern High School and then went to the Detroit Tigers and is now passed away, but is in the Hall of Fame. And they eventually worked at Springfield or Spring Grove Hospital in the state hospital system. But they were on their way to a school in London. And I think that in the day after Kristallnacht, all the Jewish men in Gardelegen were arrested and taken to a camp. But Walter Sonnenfeld, the father, was freed soon thereafter because he was able to prove that he had an Iron Cross from fighting in World War I. So that the whole family survived. But the highlight of my trip to Gardelegen, and I had a resident take me around all day, but the highlight was being on the train by myself, headed back to Berlin, and just imagining what it was like for Uncle Hal to perhaps be on that train, perhaps thinking he would never be back where he had grown up, never see his father again. And it's about 56 years ago and 16 presidential transitions ago that Henry Kissinger asked my Uncle Hal to be his Soviet affairs expert on the National Security Council in the Nixon administration. And there are certain stories which I can't tell tonight, but but Hal came to the United States. Johns Hopkins ironically met my aunt, a Heck family daughter, at selling cameras at the Heck Company. And this is America. And I will be seeing his daughter, Babette, named after my mother, 2 weekends from now in New York. And I'll obviously tell her about tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, let me come around.
Sort of like in memory of my husband who died recently, but he was born in Belgium, and luckily his father was very prescient, and he decided that he had to take his wife and his 2 sons out of Belgium. This was about 1940, and they left. He was able to leave. He was also a wealthy man at the time. They lost all their money, and they ended up at Dunkirk. My husband was actually at Dunkirk, saw the movie, heard all the stories. And he was about 6 years old, his brother was 9. And of course they were evacuating the British soldiers. So they had to go back to Belgium. He was from Antwerp. And next thing they did was go over the mountains like the Von Trapps. And they ended up in Spain, which was neutral at the time. And they ended up taking a boat and they went to Cuba. And Rene and his family, his father died, I think, from all this stress of this, getting his family out. And he and his mother and his brother lived in New Jersey, and then he moved to Baltimore for work. But that they were lucky that his father was, but the rest of the family, the grandparents and all were gone, and a lot of aunts and uncles, but they were the lucky ones to get out. And he did spend a year in Cuba.
Do we have any questions for Judy? We only have time for maybe 2 more.
Okay.
Judy. Hi, I'm just curious. What do you do if a house of residence has been torn down?
So I'm not sure. I mean, I think they can still place the stone on the sidewalk. So it's usually placed on the sidewalk, so it really wouldn't have anything to do with the actual building.
Thank you.
You scoot around.
I'll try that. My specific question is, does the community in Germany have to agree to place Stolpersteins? I was just in Germany in July, and the towns that my parents came from, one was a tiny village. I'll be able to get something here.
No, I think it has to have the approval. Like Munich, the Jewish community won't allow it because they feel that you're disrespecting a person by walking on. Yeah.
Well, there is no Jewish community in the town.
Munich, yeah, no, No, I was talking, you said in general, whether it's, the community has to want it and has to agree to it.
Well, Kristallnacht is a special meeting for my family because as the Nazis were destroying the front of the house, they ran out the back. And my father and my brother were the only two Jewish men in the district who did not go to die.
Judy, this is a bit off the subject, but not completely. We're aware that the Nazis were meticulous in their record keeping, but I'm impressed with the little villages that you mentioned and the facts that they have so much history and who lived here. And were you impressed with that as you went from one place to another, or even the writing back and forth to Europe? It took you a while to get all this information, but I'm impressed that they're able to look up whatever you wanted to know.
Well, so for Berlin, I had information.
But the little villages that you talked
Well,
about, the
Brockle.
parents.
So,
That's what I was just going to say as well. Yeah, I went back to my father's farm town in a little hole in the wall outside of Prague, and we walked in the door and said who we were, and then file cabinets and copying machines started to work, giving us copies of everything. Even the concentration camps had tremendous record keeping. They knew what happened when. My father survived the camp of Theresienstadt by playing soccer for the Germans on Sunday as entertainment. And that's how he got extra food, because he needed extra strength to play on soccer for entertainment. And when we went back to Theresienstadt, we met the museum curator there, and he says, oh, your father played on the spring team, and they came in second.
Wow.
And then they came and they played in the fall, and then they came in first, and whatever. And they knew the exact everything. They are scanning, just like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They are also scanning tremendous. They have huge archives. Huge archives. I mean, it'll be available for our children and our children's children. Let's have a few more.
So I just wanted to look at it from the other side, and that's for the Jews living in Europe. When I've gone back to Germany, the family I have there didn't survive the Holocaust. I have family that's not Jewish. Well, I've been to all the places, but I don't see other Jews. My one cousin who's still in Prague, the whole family, she got out to Theresienstadt. The rest of my family is killed in Auschwitz. I doubt they would want Stolpenstein because they're afraid. We have a diary and everything else. They forbid us to publish it because they're so afraid of anti-Semitism. So I think in starting this, it's good that this is happening, that the archive records are kept. It's almost a atonement of the non-Jews. But we do have living Jews there who might. My question is: did you see any members of the Jewish community when the Stolpensteinen were laid? I didn't see anyone. I went to a synagogue hidden in a Chinese restaurant. I on the second floor of a Chinese restaurant when I lived there on Shabbat every week, and it was deliberately hidden. So our memories are in us, but our memories are our brothers and sisters there as well.
So, I mean, there weren't any Jews at the ceremony for the laying of the stones, except my family. But, certainly we did go to synagogues when we were in Berlin. And I don't think the little town of Brockle doesn't, I'll find out more when I go there next week, but I don't think there's any Jews there. Yeah, and I think they're doing work to find out more. I was surprised I didn't realize that there's a Jewish cemetery in Brockle with all of my forefathers, and they, I guess, have diligently kind of gone and labeled each zone so they know, who's there. So,
if you go online, can you find the names in various towns? How are they listed?
A lot, so sometimes if you just put the name in and you Google it, it may come up. But like in Berlin, they're kind of it's very sophisticated. If you Google, Stumbling Stone Berlin, you will come to a web page, and if you put in the name Weiler, it'll bring up all the Weilers where there's stones, and it'll give you the address, and then you'll see a biography. So, but other towns don't have the researchers. So when I looked into it for Budapest, they're not as elaborate. They don't have biographies. So.
Come on, Sarah, go ahead. Rock and roll.
I just wondered if you had contact information to find out if other countries like Poland, Belarus, other areas participate in this program.
So basically, to find out, if you go to the Stumbling Stones webpage, and it's in the handout. Yeah, so if you put that in, you can then email someone, and then they usually forward it on to the country if they're doing it in that country. I have one. Well, so on my mother's side, it goes back to 17-something, and my father traces the family back to the time of Napoleon, Jerome Bonaparte giving names to the Jews. Wow. So, yeah. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Once again, on behalf of the Baltimore Jewish Council, the Holocaust Remembrance Commission, and everyone in attendance tonight, whether with us or in person or in watching online, I'd like to thank our speaker, Judy Gardner, for sharing both her family story and her experience with the Stolpersteiner Project. I hope you all leave inspired and may be curious about honoring your own families in some way. We thank the audience for taking the time to join us this evening of remembrance and learning, and hope that you will all join us again in the spring as we recognize Yom HaShoah. Thank you again to our partners here at Bethel Congregation, Jill Suffel and Michael Ray, and to my incredible fellow members of the Holocaust Remembrance Commission, and my super in-house BJC liaison, Emily Goodman, for all of your dedication to this commemoration of Holocaust education. Thank you for joining us this evening. Travel home safely and go Ravens. I mean, I think it's stirring Maxine to do something for our family.
Did you get to plan another trip?
They were, when we went to the mayor's office, they thought we were coming back paying the property where my father lived. And they said, "Fooey on you, here's the signed document where our family, your family, signed it over to the government."
No, it wasn't.
Well, it stirred a bunch of huge things.
I wanted to know how they chose person. How did they choose her family?
Oh, I think it was her or her doing. I think it came from her. Yeah. Yeah. Her husband wanted to come in. That was the answer. You're welcome. Thank you for coming.